The crystalline drill sang its high-pitched note as it carved through the ancient permafrost of Kepler 452c, sending clouds of ice and debris spiraling into the thin atmosphere. Dr. Elena Vasquez wiped condensation from her helmet's visor and stared down into the excavation pit that had consumed her team's attention for the past 4 months. What they had found buried beneath 200 meters of frozen earth would change everything they thought they knew about human civilization and the nature of hope itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The discovery had started as routine archaeological work. The Harmony Collective had been systematically cataloging the remnants of extinct civilizations across the Outer Rim, hoping to understand why so many species had simply vanished from the galaxy. Humans were just another entry in their vast database of the lost, a relatively young species that had managed to spread across several star systems before disappearing into the cosmic silence that claimed so many others. Their ruins were scattered across dozens of worlds, mostly crumbling cities and abandoned space stations that told the familiar story of expansion, conflict, and eventual collapse. But this site was different. The structure they had uncovered wasn't a military installation or government facility. According to the faded signage they had translated, it was something called the Emergency Cultural Preservation Center, a name that had puzzled the xenoarchaeology team for weeks. Why would a dying civilization dedicate resources to preserving culture instead of military assets or scientific knowledge? It defied the logical patterns they had observed in countless other extinct species. Dr. Marcus Chen lowered himself into the excavation site using a gravitic descender, his 4 arms working efficiently to guide the precision tools that would finally breach the facility's main chamber. As a member of the Zentari species, Marcus possessed the patience and methodical nature that made him invaluable for delicate archaeological work. His people had evolved on a world where hasty decisions meant death, and that caution had served the Harmony Collective well in their exploration of dangerous ruins. "Elena, you need to see this," Marcus called through the communication array, his voice carrying an unusual note of excitement. "The preservation chamber is still active. We're reading stable life signs from inside." Elena felt her heart skip in the characteristic rhythm of Philorian surprise. Her species had joined the Harmony Collective 3 decades ago, bringing with them an unparalleled ability to understand and synthesize information from disparate sources. The collective valued her analytical mind and her gift for seeing patterns that others missed, but nothing in her extensive experience had prepared her for what Marcus was describing. "Confirm those readings," she said, activating her portable scanner as she descended into the pit. Active preservation systems should have failed decades ago, if not centuries. The chamber they entered defied every expectation Elena had developed about human technology. Unlike the crude mechanical systems they had found at other human sites, this facility hummed with a sophistication that bordered on the miraculous. Bioluminescent panels provided gentle illumination, while the air itself seemed to shimmer with some kind of energy field that kept the environment perfectly stable. The walls were covered with images and text in dozens of human languages, but what dominated the space were 12 cryogenic pods arranged in a circle around a central platform. Only one pod showed active readings. Dr. Sarah Kim approached the functioning unit with the careful precision of someone who had spent her career studying extinct civilizations. As the team's xenobiologist, she understood better than anyone how fragile the boundary was between life and death, especially for species that had vanished from the galaxy. Her tentacled hands moved delicately over the pod's control interface, interpreting readings that no living being had seen for over 2 centuries. "Remarkable," she whispered, her voice barely audible through the communication system. "The biological readings are completely stable. Whoever is in there isn't just preserved, they're in perfect health. It's as if they went to sleep yesterday." Elena studied the nameplate on the active pod, struggling to parse the ancient human script. The translation software in her suit provided a rough approximation that left her confused and intrigued. "Danny Rodriguez," she read aloud. "Profession listed as stand-up comedian and emergency morale specialist. What exactly is a stand-up comedian?" Marcus consulted his portable database, accessing the collective's extensive files on human culture. "According to our records, comedy was a form of human entertainment, based on the deliberate creation of humor through storytelling, observation, and social commentary. A stand-up comedian would have been someone who performed this art form professionally, typically in front of live audiences. They preserved an entertainer? Elena's confusion was evident in her voice. Not a scientist or military leader or someone with critical knowledge, but someone who told jokes for a living? Sarah's examination of the preservation chamber revealed additional details that only deepen the mystery. The facility's logs indicate that 12 individuals were placed in cryogenic sleep just before the final collapse of human civilization. 11 of the pods have experienced system failures over the centuries, but this one has maintained perfect functionality. The selection criteria for these individuals is fascinating. They weren't chosen for their technical knowledge or political importance. They were selected because they represented what humans called the essence of hope. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. The Harmony Collective had studied hundreds of extinct civilizations, and they all followed predictable patterns when facing extinction. They preserved their greatest military minds, their most advanced technology, their political leaders and scientific geniuses. They prepared for war, for conquest, for some final desperate attempt to survive through force or superior knowledge. None of them had ever thought to preserve hope itself. The discovery took on new significance when Elena cross-referenced the facility's construction date with historical records of human civilization's final period. The Emergency Cultural Preservation Center had been built during humanity's darkest hour, when their colonies were failing and their homeworld was becoming uninhabitable. Instead of focusing their remaining resources on weapons or escape plans, they had chosen to preserve the things that made them distinctly human. Artists, musicians, storytellers, and comedians. People whose only weapon was their ability to make others feel less alone in the darkness. Elena, Marcus called from across the chamber, where he had been examining the facility's central control system. I've accessed the preservation protocols. This individual was placed in stasis with specific revival instructions. They were only to be awakened in the event that another species discovered them and demonstrated a need for what the files call, quote, constructive, emotional intervention. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning, Sarah said, looking up from her biological scans, that whoever designed this facility believed that comedy could serve as a tool for rebuilding rather than just entertainment. The medical readouts indicate that this person was modified before preservation. Enhanced vocal cords, improved neurological processing for rapid pattern recognition and social adaptation, and something the files describe as empathic resonance amplification. Elena stared at the sleeping figure through the pod's transparent aluminum viewing port. Danny Rodriguez appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair and features that suggested a mixed ethnic heritage common among humans from the mid-colonization period. Even in stasis, there was something about his expression that suggested he was on the verge of smiling, as if he had been frozen in the middle of working out the punchline to some cosmic joke. The implications of the discovery began to sink in as Elena considered their current situation. The Harmony Collective had been established as a peaceful alliance of species dedicated to mutual cooperation and the preservation of knowledge. They had succeeded in creating a stable galactic civilization based on logical cooperation and shared resources. It was, by any objective measure, a perfect society. It was also slowly dying. The problem wasn't war or disease or any of the traditional threats that had destroyed other civilizations. The collective citizens were healthy, well-fed, and safe. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They had eliminated poverty, conflict, and want. They had created a post-scarcity society where every being could pursue their interests without fear or competition. It should have been paradise. Instead, it was a slow-motion catastrophe of apathy and despair. Birth rates across all member species had been declining for decades. Suicide rates were climbing despite unprecedented prosperity. Creative output had dwindled to almost nothing as citizens lost interest in art, music, literature, and innovation. The collective's greatest minds had spent years trying to understand why their perfect society was generating such profound unhappiness. But their logical approaches had failed to identify the root cause of the malaise. Elena had been studying this crisis for the better part of a decade, analyzing population data and psychological profiles from across the collective's territory. The pattern was consistent across all species and all worlds. Citizens reported feeling disconnected, purposeless, and emotionally numb, despite having every material need satisfied. They described their lives as meaningless, even when engaged in objectively important work. It was as if the very perfection of their society had drained away something essential to sentient existence. The solution, when Elena finally recognized it, was as simple as it was revolutionary. The collective had optimized for every aspect of survival and prosperity except one. They had forgotten how to experience joy. Sarah, Elena said, making a decision that would change the course of galactic history, begin revival procedures immediately. Sarah's tentacles curled in a gesture that indicated surprise among her species. Elena, we don't have authorization for that kind of intervention. Revival of preserved sentience requires approval from the Collective Council, extensive safety protocols, and psychological evaluation of the subject. The process could take months. The collective is dying, Elena replied, her voice carrying the weight of certainty that came from years of analysis. Not from war or plague or external threat, but from an absence of the very thing this human was preserved to provide. We've created a perfect logical society, but we've eliminated everything that makes existence worth experiencing. Marcus emerged from behind the control console, his forearms moving in the complex gestures his species used to indicate deep thought. Elena, even if you're correct about the nature of our crisis, we have no way of knowing whether this individual can actually help. Comedy is a uniquely human trait. We don't even know if other species can understand or benefit from their approach to humor. Elena accessed her portable analysis unit and began pulling up the psychological profiles that had consumed her research for years. Look at these patterns, she said, projecting the data into the chamber's holographic display system. Every member species of the collective shows the same decline in emotional engagement, the same loss of purpose and connection. The specific manifestations vary by species, but the underlying problem is identical. We've optimized our society for logical efficiency, but we've eliminated the illogical elements that create emotional meaning. The data painted a stark picture of a civilization in decline. Zentari citizens, traditionally known for their patient craftsmanship, had lost interest in creating anything beyond the purely functional. Phylorian scholars, once celebrated for their innovative research, now focused exclusively on cataloging existing knowledge rather than discovering new insights. Sarah's own people, the Kythera, had seen their birth rates plummet as they struggled to find meaning in bringing new life into a world that felt emotionally barren. Comedy, Elena continued, isn't just entertainment. According to human cultural studies, it served multiple functions in their society. It created social bonds, relieved stress, provided perspective on difficult situations, and most importantly, it helped people find meaning and connection even in the darkest circumstances. If this individual was specifically enhanced and preserved to provide, quote, constructive emotional intervention, then they might represent exactly what our civilization needs. Sarah ran her specialized appendages over the revival chamber's controls, checking and rechecking the biological readings. The medical systems are all functioning perfectly. Physiologically, there's no reason the revival couldn't proceed immediately. But, Elena, we're talking about awakening someone who has been asleep for over 2 centuries. Their entire species is extinct, their civilization is gone, and they'll be completely alone among aliens. The psychological trauma could be overwhelming. Or, Elena said quietly, they might be exactly what they were designed to be. Someone capable of finding hope and meaning in impossible circumstances, and sharing that gift with others. The debate continued for several hours as the team grappled with the implications of their decision. The collective's protocols existed for good reasons. Premature revival of preserved beings had led to disasters in the past, including several cases where traumatized survivors had suffered complete psychological breaks upon learning about the extinction of their species. The ethical implications of awakening someone without their explicit consent were significant, even if the original preservation protocols seemed to anticipate exactly this scenario. But as Elena reviewed the data about the collective's declining emotional health, she became increasingly convinced that they were facing an emergency that justified extraordinary measures. The mathematical models were clear. At current rates of population decline and psychological deterioration, the collective would face civilizational collapse within a century. Not from external threats or resource depletion, but from a simple loss of will to continue existing. "There's something else," Marcus said, highlighting a section of the facility's archived files. The preservation protocols include extensive psychological preparation for revival under these exact circumstances. This individual wasn't just frozen and forgotten. They underwent months of conditioning designed to help them adapt to awakening in an alien civilization. The humans who built this facility anticipated that their entire species might be extinct by the time someone was revived. Elena studied the psychological preparation records with growing amazement. The human designers had created a comprehensive program to help their preserved individuals cope with species extinction, cultural displacement, and the trauma of awakening in a completely foreign environment. They had understood that their comedians and artists might be humanity's final gift to the galaxy, and they had prepared them accordingly. The preparation had included intensive training in cross-species communication, accelerated learning protocols for rapid language acquisition, and psychological conditioning to help maintain emotional stability in extreme isolation. Most remarkably, the humans had developed what they called adaptive humor protocols, techniques for translating comedic concepts across vastly different cultural and biological frameworks. "They thought of everything," Sarah marveled as she reviewed the medical enhancement records. Enhanced pattern recognition for understanding alien psychology, improved vocal control for mimicking different species communication methods, and neurological modifications to increase empathic sensitivity. This person isn't just a comedian. They're a specially designed cultural ambassador programmed to help other species find joy and meaning in existence. Elena made her final decision with the weight of an entire civilization's future pressing on her consciousness. "Begin revival procedures immediately. If we're wrong about this, we can deal with the consequences. If we're right and we do nothing, there won't be a collective left to preserve anyone's protocols." The revival process took 18 hours. Sarah monitored every biological function as Danny Rodriguez's body slowly returned to full metabolic activity. His brain patterns showed normal dream-sleep activity for the first 12 hours, then began the complex transition to consciousness that marked successful cryogenic revival. His enhanced physiology responded perfectly to the warming process, with none of the cellular damage or organ dysfunction that often complicated revival procedures. Elena found herself standing vigil beside the pod as the final stages of revival proceeded. Through the transparent viewing port, she could see the sleeping human's face growing more animated as consciousness returned. Even before his eyes opened, she could see the subtle changes in expression that suggested active thought and awareness. There was something about his features that projected warmth and approachability, qualities that Elena had rarely encountered in her scientifically minded colleagues. When Danny Rodriguez finally opened his eyes, the first thing he did was smile. Elena had studied human facial expressions extensively as part of her research into extinct civilizations, but she had never seen a genuine human smile in person. The effect was startling. Despite the fact that he was clearly disoriented and surrounded by alien faces, despite awakening into a world where his entire species was extinct, this human's first instinct was to express warmth and friendliness. "Well," Danny said in perfectly clear Standard Galactic, his voice carrying a melodic quality that the enhancement procedures had clearly optimized for maximum communicative effect, "either I've got the worst hangover in human history, or the welcome committee is a lot more interesting than they promised." Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. She laughed. The sound surprised her so much that she actually checked her suit's audio systems to make sure she had produced it correctly. Thylaurian laughter was a rare occurrence, typically reserved for moments of profound relief or unexpected resolution to complex problems. But this human had somehow triggered the response with nothing more than a simple observation about his circumstances. "Danny Rodriguez," she said, reading from his identification records. "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenoarchaeologist with the Harmony Collective. You've been in cryogenic preservation for 237 years. I'm afraid I have some difficult news to share with you." Danny sat up slowly in the revival chamber, his enhanced physiology adapting smoothly to movement after centuries of stasis. His eyes moved around the chamber, taking in the alien technology, the mixed species team, and the obvious signs that this was neither his time nor his world. Elena watched his face carefully, preparing for the psychological breakdown that typically accompanied such revelations. Instead, Danny nodded thoughtfully and said, "Let me guess. Humanity didn't make it. The galaxy is run by a completely different bunch of folks now, and you found me in what basically amounts to a time capsule full of frozen entertainers. Am I close? Sarah's tentacles curled in amazement. How could you possibly know that? Danny's smile widened, and Elena felt that strange sensation again. The human's presence seemed to create a field of emotional warmth that she had never experienced before. Because, he said, that's exactly the kind of absolutely insane situation that would require the services of a professional comedian. The people who put me on ice weren't stupid. They knew that whoever found me would probably need exactly what I'm designed to provide. Marcus approached the revival chamber with the careful precision of someone who had spent his career dealing with potentially dangerous archaeological discoveries. And what exactly are you designed to provide? Danny stood up fully, stretching muscles that had been inactive for centuries. The enhancement procedures had clearly been successful. He moved with perfect coordination and showed no signs of the disorientation that typically plagued revival subjects. Hope, he said simply. I'm designed to help people remember why existence is worth the trouble, even when everything seems completely hopeless. Elena felt her analytical mind racing as she processed the implications of Danny's response. The human displayed none of the psychological trauma they had expected. Instead, he seemed genuinely curious about his new circumstances and eager to understand how he could help. The preparation protocols had clearly been more effective than anyone had imagined. Danny, Elena said carefully, the civilization that found you is facing a crisis that our best minds haven't been able to solve. We've created a perfect society by every logical measure, but our citizens are losing the will to live. Birth rates are declining, creativity has virtually disappeared, and people report feeling disconnected and purposeless despite having every material need satisfied. Danny listened to Elena's explanation with the focused attention of a professional diagnosing a familiar problem. As she described the collective symptoms of societal depression, his expression grew increasingly thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for several moments, processing the information with the enhanced pattern recognition that his modifications provided. So, he said finally, you've basically created a galaxy-wide case of existential depression by solving all the obvious problems but forgetting to leave room for joy, surprise, and meaning. That's actually pretty impressive. Most civilizations destroy themselves with war or environmental collapse. You guys managed to accidentally optimize yourselves into emotional numbness. The accuracy of his diagnosis was startling. Elena had spent years developing theoretical frameworks to explain the collective's crisis, but Danny had identified the core issue in minutes. More importantly, his tone suggested that he viewed this as a problem with a solution, rather than an insurmountable tragedy. Can it be fixed? Sarah asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution about dealing with unknown alien psychology. Danny's smile returned, and with it came that strange field of emotional warmth that seemed to affect everyone in the chamber. Oh, absolutely. This is exactly the kind of problem humans use to specialize in solving. See, you guys made a classic mistake. You assumed that happiness comes from the absence of problems, but that's backwards. Happiness comes from having the right kinds of problems to solve, and more importantly, having people to solve them with. Marcus's forearms moved in complex patterns as he processed this statement. I don't understand. Logically, the elimination of problems should increase well-being and satisfaction. Logically, sure, Danny agreed, but consciousness isn't logical. It's biological. And biologically, we're all problem-solving organisms that evolved to find meaning through challenge, cooperation, and social connection. When you eliminate all the problems, you eliminate the source of meaning. When you optimize away all the inefficiencies, you optimize away all the opportunities for people to help each other and feel useful. Elena found herself rapidly recalculating everything she thought she understood about social psychology. Danny's explanation was so simple and obvious that she wondered how the collective's greatest minds had missed it. But then, they had all been trained to think in terms of logical optimization rather than biological reality. The solution, Danny continued, isn't to create artificial problems or go back to war and scarcity. The solution is to help people remember how to play, how to create, how to connect with each other in ways that don't have predetermined outcomes. You need to reintroduce controlled chaos, productive inefficiency, and purposeful silliness into your perfect society. Sarah's tentacles writhed with excitement as she began to grasp the implications. You're talking about deliberately introducing elements that serve no logical function beyond emotional satisfaction. Exactly! Danny's enthusiasm was infectious, and Elena found herself feeling more energized than she had in years. Humans figured out a long time ago that the point of civilization isn't just survival. It's creating conditions where people can experience joy, wonder, creativity, and connection. Those things don't happen efficiently. They happen messily, unpredictably, and usually when people are doing things that don't make perfect logical sense. The conversation continued for several more hours as Danny learned about the current state of galactic civilization and the team began to understand the scope of what he was proposing. The humans' approach to problem-solving was unlike anything they had encountered. Instead of analyzing the crisis and developing systematic solutions, he focused on understanding how to help people feel differently about their circumstances. His enhanced empathic abilities allowed him to quickly grasp the psychological states of different species, while his pattern recognition systems helped him identify universal emotional needs that transcended biological differences. Most remarkably, his presence alone seemed to create positive emotional responses in everyone around him. Elena found herself thinking more creatively, Sarah became more curious and experimental, and even Marcus's typically methodical approach began incorporating elements of playful exploration. By the end of their initial session, Elena had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. She activated her communication array and sent a priority message to the Collective Council, requesting permission to bring Danny Rodriguez to the capital world of Nova Harmony. She proposed a limited experimental program to test whether his approach to, quote, constructive emotional intervention could address the civilization's psychological crisis. The response came back within hours. The Council, desperate for any potential solution to their declining society, approved the experiment unanimously. They requested that Danny be brought to Nova Harmony immediately for consultation with the collective's leading social scientists and psychologists. As their ship prepared for departure from Kepler 452c, Elena stood in the observation deck with Danny, watching the excavation site disappear below them. The human seemed completely at ease with leaving behind the last remnant of his species' presence on the planet, more interested in learning about his new circumstances than mourning what he had lost. "Danny," Elena said, "aren't you concerned about the enormity of what we're asking you to do? You're being asked to help fix the psychological problems of an entire galactic civilization. The pressure must be enormous." Danny chuckled, and Elena felt that now familiar warmth spreading through her consciousness. "Elena, I spent my whole career getting on stage in front of crowds of people who expected me to make them laugh when they were having the worst days of their lives. I performed for audiences going through divorces, job losses, health crises, and existential despair. If there's one thing comedians understand, it's how to help people feel better about impossible situations." He gestured toward the viewport, where the stars of the galactic core were beginning to become visible as their ship picked up speed. "Besides, this is actually the perfect setup for comedy. A frozen human comedian wakes up in a galaxy full of depressed aliens who have accidentally optimized themselves into emotional numbness. I mean, the material writes itself." Elena found herself laughing again, a sound that was becoming less foreign to her with each passing hour. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely optimistic about the future. The collective's crisis was far from solved, but they now had something they hadn't possessed before. Someone who understood that the solution to existential despair wasn't more logic or better systems, but the simple recognition that existence could be joyful if you approached it with the right attitude. As their ship entered hyperspace bound for Nova Harmony, Elena began to understand what the ancient humans had meant when they preserved hope itself. Danny Rodriguez wasn't just a comedian. He was living proof that consciousness could find meaning and joy even in the darkest circumstances, and that laughter really could be a weapon of mass construction. The real test, however, was still ahead of them. Could one human comedian really help heal the psychological wounds of an entire galactic civilization? Elena was beginning to think the answer might be yes, but she also understood that the challenges they would face on Nova Harmony would test both Danny's abilities and the collective's willingness to embrace the beautiful chaos of genuine happiness. The grand amphitheater of Nova Harmony buzzed with the nervous energy of 500 of the galaxy's most brilliant minds, all gathered to witness what many considered either a breakthrough moment or an elaborate waste of time. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the massive circular stage, watching Danny Rodriguez examine the venue with the practiced eye of someone who had performed in countless venues across human space centuries ago. The amphitheater itself was a marvel of collective engineering, designed for perfect acoustics and optimal viewing angles from every seat. Holographic projection systems could create any environment imaginable, while translation matrices ensured that every word spoken could be understood by all 47 member species of the Harmony Collective. It was, by every measure, the most technologically advanced performance space in galactic history. Danny walked to the center of the stage and clapped his hands once. The sound echoed through the space with crystalline clarity, reaching every corner of the amphitheater without distortion. He nodded approvingly and turned to Elena with that characteristic smile that had become increasingly familiar over the past week of preparation. "Great acoustics," he said, his voice carrying easily to the upper tiers without amplification. "Though I have to say, this is definitely the most intimidating audience I've ever faced. Usually when I bomb on stage, I don't risk setting back interspecies relations by several decades." Elena felt that familiar flutter of amusement, though she was still learning to recognize and accept the sensation. The past week had been a revelation, as Danny had worked with the collective's psychological research teams to develop what he called cross-species comedy protocols. The process had involved extensive analysis of humor patterns across different cultures and biological frameworks, resulting in techniques that could theoretically translate comedic concepts to any sentient audience. Dr. Marcus Chen approached from the wings, his forearms carrying data tablets loaded with real-time biometric readings from the assembled audience. As the collective's leading expert on cross-species psychology, Marcus had been tasked with monitoring the experiment's effects and documenting any measurable changes in audience emotional states. "Danny," Marcus said, his voice tight with scientific curiosity and barely concealed anxiety, "the audience is ready. We have representatives from every major collective species, including several council members who specifically requested to observe this demonstration. The pressure to succeed is considerable." Danny stretched his arms and rolled his shoulders, going through what Elena had learned were pre-performance rituals designed to manage nervous energy and focus his enhanced cognitive abilities. The modifications the ancient humans had given him were subtle but profound, allowing him to process audience reactions in real time and adjust his approach accordingly. "Marcus, my friend," Danny said, placing a reassuring hand on the Zentari's shoulder. "The beautiful thing about comedy is that pressure is just another word for potential energy. The more nervous everyone is, the bigger the release when we finally get them laughing. Trust me, I've built a career on turning awkward situations into shared moments of joy." Dr. Sarah Kim emerged from the backstage monitoring station, her tentacles moving in the rapid patterns that indicated excitement among the Cathera. She had spent the week developing new equipment to measure the neurological and hormonal changes that Danny's presence seemed to trigger in different species. The preliminary results had been encouraging enough to convince the council to approve this larger-scale demonstration. "All monitoring systems are active," Sarah reported. "We're recording everything from basic heart rate and stress hormone levels to complex brain chemistry patterns. If your approach has measurable effects on audience well-being, we'll document every aspect of the process." Danny nodded and began his final preparation routine, a series of breathing exercises and mental focus techniques that the enhancement procedures had optimized for maximum performance effectiveness. Elena watched him transform from the relaxed conversational person she had come to know into something altogether more dynamic and compelling. Even without speaking, his presence on the stage began to command attention in ways that defied logical explanation. The audience settled into expectant silence as Chancellor Meridian Vel'Thas took the podium to introduce the demonstration. The Chancellor was a Vorthan, a species known for their logical precision and emotional restraint, which made her visible nervousness all the more significant. The entire collective leadership had staked considerable political capital on this experiment. "Honored colleagues and fellow citizens," the Chancellor began, her crystalline voice carrying the weight of formal authority. "We gather today to explore an unconventional approach to the psychological challenges facing our civilization. Mr. Danny Rodriguez represents a unique opportunity to understand how humor and emotional engagement might address the existential concerns that traditional methods have failed to resolve." Elena noticed that even the Chancellor's introduction carried an undertone of skepticism. The collective's scientific establishment had built their careers on logical analysis and systematic problem-solving. The idea that entertainment could serve as a therapeutic intervention challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of psychological well-being and social cohesion. Danny stepped forward as the Chancellor concluded her remarks, and Elena immediately noticed the change in the amphitheater's atmosphere. The audience's attention focused on him with an intensity that went beyond polite interest. His enhanced charisma and empathic abilities created a field of engagement that drew people in, despite their preconceptions about the frivolity of comedy. "Thank you, Chancellor Velthos," Danny said, his voice warm and conversational despite the formal setting. "I have to admit, when I went into cryogenic sleep 2.5 centuries ago, wake up and fix an entire galactic civilization's depression wasn't on my list of career goals. But then again, the best gigs are always the ones you never see coming." The response was immediate and measurable. Elena watched the audience's body language shift from formal attention to genuine interest. Several species began displaying physiological signs of amusement, while the monitoring equipment registered the first spikes in positive neurochemical activity. Danny had managed to acknowledge the gravity of their situation while simultaneously reframing it as an adventure rather than a crisis. "Now I've spent the past week learning about your civilization," Danny continued, beginning to move around the stage with the natural rhythm of an experienced performer. "And I have to say, you folks have achieved something truly remarkable. You've created a society with no poverty, no war, no disease, and no scarcity. By any rational measure, you've built paradise." The audience murmured agreement, their pride in the collective's achievements evident despite their current struggles with meaning and purpose. "The problem," Danny said, his tone shifting to conspiratorial intimacy, "is that paradise is incredibly boring." The statement hung in the air for a moment before several audience members began to laugh. Elena felt her own amusement building as Danny's observation connected with feelings she hadn't been able to articulate. The collective had indeed achieved perfection, but perfection left no room for growth, surprise, or the kind of meaningful struggle that gave life texture and purpose. "Think about it," Danny continued, encouraged by the audience's response. "What makes a good story? Conflict, challenge, uncertainty, and characters who have to figure out how to overcome obstacles through creativity and cooperation. You've eliminated all of that. You've essentially created a galaxy where everyone is living in the epilogue of a really successful adventure novel." The laughter grew stronger as more audience members recognized the truth in Danny's analysis. Elena noticed that species who rarely displayed open amusement were beginning to show signs of genuine enjoyment. The Vorthan contingent, known for their emotional restraint, were actually smiling. The Zentari representatives were displaying the arm movements that indicated pleasure and surprise among their people. Danny paused to let the audience absorb his point before continuing. "No, I'm not suggesting you should bring back war and poverty. That would be like solving boredom by setting your house on fire. Effective, but not particularly wise. What I'm suggesting is that you need to rediscover the art of productive chaos." Dr. Marcus Chen's data tablets began registering significant changes in audience brain chemistry. Stress hormones were declining, while indicators associated with curiosity and creative thinking were increasing. The neurological patterns resembled those observed during moments of insight and discovery, suggesting that Danny's approach was triggering genuine cognitive and emotional shifts. "Humans learned a long time ago," Danny explained, "that the opposite of suffering isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of meaningful problems that you get to solve with people you care about. You need challenges that are big enough to be interesting but small enough to be achievable. You need projects that might fail in amusing ways. You need reasons to collaborate that go beyond pure efficiency." Elena found herself thinking about her own research with renewed enthusiasm. For years, she had approached her work as a systematic cataloging of extinct civilizations, focused on documenting facts and patterns with scientific precision. But Danny's perspective suggested that the real value of her research might lie in understanding how different species had found meaning and joy in existence, lessons that could be applied to current challenges. "Let me give you an example," Danny said, moving to center stage where the holographic projection system could support his demonstration. "Dr. Vasquez, would you mind joining me up here?" Elena felt a moment of panic as hundreds of eyes focused on her, but Danny's encouraging smile and the audience's expectant energy drew her onto the stage. She had never been comfortable with public attention, preferring the quiet precision of laboratory work to the unpredictability of performance. "Elena here is a brilliant xenoarchaeologist," Danny announced to the audience. "She's spent years studying extinct civilizations, documenting their achievements and failures with scientific rigor, but I bet she's never thought of her work as comedy material." Elena shook her head, uncertain where Danny was leading but trusting in his expertise. The audience leaned forward with anticipation, sensing that they were about to witness something unexpected. "Elena, tell the audience about the most ridiculous extinct civilization you've ever studied," Danny requested. "Not the most tragic or significant, but the one that made the most hilariously poor decisions." Elena thought for a moment, then smiled as she remembered a particularly absurd case from her early research. "There was a species called the xenoarchaeological," she began, her voice growing stronger as she warmed to the topic. "They were incredibly advanced, capable of interstellar travel and sophisticated technology, but they went extinct because they couldn't agree on the proper way to organize their digital music libraries." The audience stirred with interest as Elena continued. "They spent so much time and energy debating classification systems for their entertainment media that they neglected basic infrastructure maintenance. Their civilization literally collapsed because they were too busy arguing about whether songs should be organized by composer, emotional content, or mathematical properties of the melodies." Danny's grin widened as he saw the audience beginning to laugh at the absurdity of the xenoarchaeological's priorities. "And the beautiful thing is," he added, "they probably thought they were solving a really important problem. They couldn't see that they were missing the forest for the trees, or in this case, missing the civilization for the playlist." The laughter that followed was different from the polite amusement Danny had generated earlier. This was genuine, shared recognition of the universal tendency toward ridiculous priorities and misplaced focus. Elena realized that by reframing the xenoarchaeological's tragedy as comedy, Danny had helped the audience see both the humor in the situation and the underlying lesson about maintaining perspective on what truly mattered. "This is what I mean by productive chaos," Danny explained as the laughter subsided. "Elena just took a piece of scientific research and turned it into entertainment that teaches us something important about ourselves. She found meaning and connection by sharing knowledge in a way that created joy rather than just information transfer." Elena felt a rush of understanding as she grasped the implications of what had just happened. Her research had always been valuable from a scientific perspective, but Danny had shown her how it could also serve as a tool for building community and shared understanding. The same information could simultaneously educate, entertain, and create emotional bonds between diverse individuals. "The key," Danny continued, addressing the audience directly, "is learning to approach your perfect society with a sense of play. Not because your achievements aren't important, but because play is how consciousness explores possibilities and builds connections. When you eliminate all opportunities for creative problem-solving, you eliminate the experiences that make existence feel meaningful." Dr. Sarah Kim's monitoring equipment was now registering remarkable changes throughout the audience. Stress markers had dropped to levels not seen in decades, while indicators of social bonding and creative engagement were spiking across all species. The neurological patterns suggested that Danny's presentation was triggering the kind of positive psychological states that the collective citizens had been unconsciously craving. "So here's my proposal," Danny said, building toward what Elena recognized as his climactic argument. "Instead of trying to optimize away all of life's inefficiencies, embrace them. Create spaces for purposeful silliness. Establish projects that might fail in interesting ways. Encourage people to collaborate on endeavors that serve no purpose beyond the joy of working together toward uncertain outcomes." He gestured toward Elena, who was still standing beside him on the stage. Elena's archaeological work could become the foundation for galactic storytelling festivals, where citizens compete to find the most amusing lessons from extinct civilizations. Dr. Chen's psychological research could evolve into community programs where different species teach each other their unique approaches to happiness and meaning. The audience was now actively engaged, with representatives from different species beginning to exchange ideas and suggestions. Elena could see the transformation happening in real time, as Danny's vision sparked creativity and enthusiasm that had been dormant for decades. "The beautiful thing about this approach," Danny concluded, "is that it doesn't require you to abandon any of your achievements. It just asks you to remember that the point of building a perfect society isn't to eliminate all challenges, but to create conditions where people can choose challenges that inspire rather than threaten them. The applause that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced in an academic setting. It wasn't the polite acknowledgement of a successful presentation, but the enthusiastic response of an audience that had been genuinely moved and inspired. Representatives from species that rarely interacted socially were approaching each other with animated discussions about potential collaborative projects. Chancellor Veltos took the stage as the demonstration concluded, her typically composed demeanor showing cracks of genuine emotion. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, her crystalline voice carrying new warmth, "your presentation has provided our leadership with much to consider. The preliminary data suggests that your approach may indeed offer solutions to challenges that have resisted our traditional methods." Danny nodded graciously, but Elena could see that he was already thinking ahead to the larger implications of what they had accomplished. The demonstration had been successful beyond their most optimistic projections, but it had also revealed the enormous scope of the work that lay ahead. As the audience dispersed into animated conversations, Elena found herself surrounded by colleagues who had barely spoken to her in months. The shared experience of Danny's presentation had created connections and sparked interests that went far beyond the formal boundaries of their professional relationships. For the first time in years, she felt part of a genuine community, rather than just a collection of individuals pursuing parallel but separate goals. "Elena," Danny said, joining her as the amphitheater gradually emptied, "you did great up there. You're a natural storyteller, you just needed permission to let your personality show through your expertise." Elena felt a flush of pride and accomplishment that surprised her with its intensity. "Danny, what you did today was remarkable, but I'm starting to understand that this was just the beginning. The real challenge will be implementing these ideas on a galactic scale." Danny's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the magnitude of what they were proposing. "You're right. Today was about proving that the concept works. Tomorrow is about figuring out how to help an entire civilization remember how to play, create, and find joy in existence. It's going to require changes that go far beyond entertainment and comedy." Dr. Marcus Chen approached them, his forearms moving in patterns of excitement and concern. "The biometric data is extraordinary," he reported. "We documented measurable improvements in every psychological and physiological marker we were monitoring. But the effects are already beginning to fade as audience members return to their normal routines." Elena nodded, having anticipated this challenge. "The question is whether we can create lasting changes in how people approach their daily lives, not just how they respond to special events." Danny smiled, but Elena noticed that the expression carried new weight and complexity. The comedian was beginning to understand that his role extended far beyond entertainment into the realm of fundamental social transformation. "That's where things get really interesting," he said. "Today we proved that the medicine works. Now we need to figure out how to help an entire civilization change its relationship with existence itself. And that's going to require some very careful thinking about how far we're willing to go to save a society that might not want to be saved." 6 months after the amphitheater demonstration, Danny Rodriguez stood in the observation lounge of the orbital station above Kepler Prime, watching crowds of citizens participate in what the media had dubbed chaos festivals across the planet's surface. The events were exactly what he had envisioned during those early conversations with Elena, collaborative celebrations where different species worked together on purposefully inefficient projects designed purely for joy and connection. Below, thousands of beings were constructing elaborate temporary sculptures using only materials they could find within walking distance of the festival sites. The rules were deliberately absurd, requiring teams of mixed species to communicate only through interpretive dance, while building structures that served no function beyond making people smile. The laughter was visible even from orbit as geometric shapes collapsed in amusing ways, and participants discovered creative solutions to impossible challenges. Danny should have felt triumphant. His approach had succeeded beyond every projection. Birth rates across the collective had stabilized for the first time in decades. Suicide rates had plummeted. Creative output had exploded as citizens rediscovered the pleasure of making things without predetermined outcomes. The psychological crisis that had threatened galactic civilization was being systematically transformed into a renaissance of purposeful play and meaningful connection. Instead, he felt hollow. Dr. Elena Vasquez joined him at the observation window, carrying 2 cups of the synthetic coffee that had become Danny's preferred stimulant during his extended work sessions. She had changed considerably over the past months, her natural warmth and humor emerging as she learned to integrate Danny's teachings into her archaeological research. Her discoveries about extinct civilizations had become the foundation for enormously popular storytelling competitions that brought together species who had never previously found common ground. The Vorthen Council just approved funding for permanent creativity centers on all their core worlds, Elena reported, settling beside Danny with the comfortable familiarity that had developed between them. They want installations that can facilitate cross-species collaboration on projects with no measurable utility beyond participant satisfaction. Danny nodded without enthusiasm, his gaze fixed on the festival activities below. The Vorthens had been among the most resistant to his proposals initially, their culture built around logical efficiency and measurable outcomes. Their embrace of purposeful chaos represented a fundamental shift in galactic thinking about the nature of meaningful existence. "That's wonderful," he said, his voice lacking the warmth that usually characterized his responses to good news. "How many worlds does that bring us to now?" 47 core worlds and over 200 colonies have implemented some version of your programs, Elena replied, studying Danny's profile with growing concern. "The transformation has been remarkable, Danny. You've accomplished exactly what you set out to do. Entire species are rediscovering joy and meaning in existence." Danny turned away from the window, and Elena saw something in his expression that made her chest tighten with worry. The comedian who had awakened from cryogenic sleep with infectious enthusiasm and unshakable optimism had gradually been replaced by someone who seemed increasingly burdened by the weight of his own success. "Elena," Danny said quietly, "what happens to a weapon when the war is over?" The question caught Elena off guard, forcing her to consider implications she had been avoiding for weeks. Danny's role had always been framed in terms of healing and construction, but Elena realized that his position in their society had become something altogether more complex and potentially dangerous. "You're not a weapon," she said firmly. "You're a teacher, a healer, someone who helps people connect with their capacity for joy." Danny's smile was sad and tired in ways that reminded Elena of ancient human artwork depicting figures carrying unbearable burdens. "Am I? Or am I something that was designed to manipulate the emotional states of entire populations for specific outcomes? The difference might be smaller than we'd like to admit." The observation hit Elena with uncomfortable force. Danny's enhancements allowed him to read and influence the psychological states of virtually any sentient being he encountered. His presence alone could trigger measurable changes in brain chemistry and social behavior. The same abilities that made him effective at spreading joy could theoretically be used for far more sinister purposes. "The humans who created you didn't design a weapon," Elena insisted. "They preserved hope itself, someone capable of helping others find meaning in impossible circumstances." "Did they?" Danny asked, moving to the station's central holographic display and activating a star map showing the spread of his programs across collective space. "Or did they create the perfect tool for social control? Someone who could convince entire civilizations to embrace any ideology by making it feel emotionally satisfying?" Elena stared at the display, seeing Danny's influence spreading across the galaxy like a beneficial infection. Every world that had implemented his programs showed dramatic improvements in citizen well-being and social cohesion. But Elena began to understand the darker implications of such widespread psychological influence concentrated in a single individual. "Danny, you've used your abilities to help people find genuine happiness and connection. The changes you've created are positive and voluntary." "This time," Danny replied. "But what about next time, when someone decides that the galaxy would be better served by different emotional outcomes? What happens when political leaders realize they have access to someone who can make any policy feel right to entire populations?" The weight of Danny's concerns settled over Elena as she grasped the full scope of what they had unleashed. Danny hadn't just solved the collective psychological crisis. He had demonstrated that consciousness itself could be systematically influenced by someone with the right combination of charisma, empathic abilities, and psychological insight. The implications for democratic governance and individual autonomy were staggering. You're saying that your success proves you're too dangerous to exist, Elena said, the words feeling like lead in her mouth. Danny nodded slowly, his expression carrying the weight of months of internal struggle. I'm saying that I've become something that no individual should be allowed to become. The power to systematically influence the emotional states of entire civilizations is too much for any one person to wield responsibly. Elena felt tears forming as she realized where Danny's logic was leading. You're planning to return to cryogenic sleep. I'm planning to ensure that the galaxy never again has to worry about whether someone with my abilities can be trusted with the power I've accidentally accumulated. Danny's voice was steady, but Elena could see the profound sadness behind his decision. The programs I've created can continue without me. The principles can be taught to others without the concentrated influence that makes me personally dangerous. Elena wanted to argue, to find some alternative that would allow Danny to continue his work without the ethical complications his presence created. But her analytical mind forced her to acknowledge the validity of his concerns. Danny had become something unprecedented in galactic history, someone whose mere presence could alter the psychological trajectory of entire civilizations. There has to be another way, she said desperately, some method of limiting your influence while preserving the good work you're doing. Danny smiled with genuine warmth for the first time in weeks. Elena, you've become one of the most effective advocates for cross-species understanding in collective history. Dr. Chen has developed therapeutic programs that help people find meaning without requiring my direct involvement. Dr. Kim has created technologies that can measure and enhance positive psychological states across different species. The work will continue and evolve in ways I never could have accomplished alone. Elena realized that Danny had been preparing for this moment for months, gradually transferring his knowledge and techniques to others while establishing systems that could function independently of his presence. He had been systematically making himself unnecessary while building a foundation for lasting change. The humans who preserved you knew this would happen, Elena said, understanding finally dawning. They knew that someone with your abilities would eventually face this choice. They probably did, Danny agreed. The psychological preparation included extensive conditioning for this exact scenario. They understood that the power to heal consciousness could also be the power to control it, and they prepared me to make the right choice when that distinction became important. Elena felt a profound sense of loss mixed with admiration for the civilization that had created such complex ethical safeguards. The humans had preserved not just hope itself, but someone programmed to sacrifice that hope rather than risk its corruption. Before you go, Elena said, I need to understand something. Was any of it real? The connections we formed, the joy you helped us discover, the sense of meaning and purpose that transformed our civilization? Danny's expression softened with genuine affection as he looked at Elena. Every moment was real. The laughter was real. The connections were real. The renewed sense of purpose and meaning was completely genuine. What I helped you discover was always inside you, I just reminded you how to access it. Elena nodded, understanding that Danny's withdrawal wouldn't negate the transformations he had catalyzed. The collective had rediscovered its capacity for joy and meaningful connection, abilities that would persist, regardless of their catalyst's presence. Will you be happy? Elena asked. Going back to sleep while the galaxy you saved continues without you? Danny looked out at the festival activities below, where thousands of beings continued to celebrate the beautiful chaos of purposeful play. Elena, happiness isn't about getting what you want. It's about wanting what contributes to the well-being of others. I'll sleep peacefully, knowing that consciousness itself has learned to laugh again. 3 days later, Elena stood in the same cryogenic facility where they had first awakened Danny Rodriguez. The preservation chamber had been upgraded with collective technology, ensuring that he could be safely maintained for centuries or awakened immediately if circumstances required his return. Danny lay in the chamber, already sedated and prepared for the long sleep. His expression was peaceful, carrying the same hint of amusement that had characterized his first awakening. He had left detailed instructions that he should only be revived if the galaxy faced another existential crisis that required his specific abilities. Elena placed her hand on the chamber's viewing port, feeling the cool surface that separated her from the most remarkable individual she had ever encountered. The human who had taught an entire galactic civilization to remember the value of laughter and purposeful chaos then voluntarily relinquish that influence rather than risk its corruption. "Sleep well, Danny," she whispered, "and thank you for reminding us that weapons of mass construction are sometimes the most dangerous weapons of all." As the preservation systems activated and Danny Rodriguez returned to the timeless sleep of cryogenic stasis, Elena walked away knowing that his greatest gift to the galaxy hadn't been his ability to heal consciousness, but his wisdom in recognizing when that healing had become complete. The festivals continued across collective space, laughter echoed through previously sterile corridors, and citizens discovered daily that existence could be both meaningful and joyful. The comedian slept, but the comedy lived on, proving that the best teachers are those who make themselves unnecessary by empowering others to carry their lessons forward. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to step away, and Danny Rodriguez had loved an entire galactic civilization enough to disappear rather than risk becoming the very thing he had been created to heal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.